Welcome to NarrativeNook audio tales where enchanted stories come to life. If you enjoy our stories, please subscribe, like and share to support our channel. Enjoy listening. Around half an hour later, Frida arrived and strode into the house cockily. She only put her arrogance aside when she realized Alfred was sitting on the couch. "You are here, Grandpa," Frida greeted Alfred with a pang of guilt. Alfred threw her a displeased look and scoffed. Frida rubbed her nose idly and made to join them on the couch. "Stand right there," Jonathan snapped. Frida halted in her tracks unwillingly. As Alfred was around, she returned to her spot and stood there silently. "Do you know why I asked you to come home?" Jonathan demanded. Frida pursed her lips and feigned ignorance. "I don't know. I was shopping when you asked me to come back." "Why are you upset?" Jonathan wore a wintry expression. "Did you order Rex not to provide medicinal herbs to Dr. Jarvis Research Institute?" Frida nodded indifferently. Seeing her response, Alfred and Jonathan shared a look of confusion. Ever since Frida first met Roxanne, she had been at odds with the latter. Her grudge nearly caused Queen Group's reputation to take a fall, but she didn't think she was wrong. "Why did you do that?" Jonathan furrowed his brows. Frida pretended to be surprised. "Jonathan, don't you know that all the medicinal herb suppliers have been warned by Farwell Group not to supply any medicinal herbs to Roxanne? If we continue supplying medicinal herbs to her, we're announcing that we're going against Farwell Group." A flash of surprise appeared in Jonathan's gaze. No wonder Roxanne said all the other medicinal herb suppliers stopped supplying the Research Institute with medicinal herbs when she came here in the morning. However, she didn't explain why. It turns out that Farwell Group was behind it. Jonathan recalled that Lucian and Roxanne seemed to be on good terms previously. In fact, Lucian defended Roxanne more than once. Thus, he couldn't understand why Roxanne was targeted. As he frowned in puzzlement, Frida added, "Mrs. Farwell didn't say anything to us as we're close to them. But since we're working closely with Farwell Group, shouldn't we side with them? We will be going against Mrs. Farwell if we insist on providing medicinal herbs to Roxanne's Research Institute as per our promise. If Mrs. Farwell gets upset, she might cause trouble for us." Jonathan's frown deepened. "Are you saying that Mrs. Farwell gave the order? Why did she do that?" Frida shot him a smug grin. "You don't know about this, huh? Roxanne is Lucian's ex-wife and Mrs. Farwell didn't like her at all. It so happened that I hated her too. Thus I took the chance to teach her a lesson." Before Frida could finish her sentence, Jonathan had guessed her intention. He leaped up from the couch abruptly. Frida's voice trailed off in shock. "Shut up. You're part of the Queen family. How could you say that? If word gets out, people will definitely laugh at us. Queen Group has built its reputation painstakingly over the years, so there is no need to take sides to show our stance." Jonathan stormed over to her and threw her a glare. Frida took 2 steps back subconsciously as she defended herself. "Did I say anything wrong? If Queen Group lands into trouble because we go against Farwell Group, that will be a huge crisis." Jonathan felt his temples throbbing. Clenching his jaw, he admonished, "Do you know why Queen Group can stand tall for over a century?" Frida hung her head low and said nothing. "That's because we deliver what we promise." Jonathan shot her a disappointed look. "If we give up on our principle easily because of personal matters, Queen Group will lose the credibility to do business in the medical industry." Frida cowered back and glanced at Alfred cautiously. She said humbly, "Jonathan, I'm doing this for Queen Group's sake. No company in Horrington dares to go against Farwell Group. Mrs. Farwell warned every medicinal herb supplier in Horrington to stay away from Roxanne. If we don't do the same, how will she think of us?" Our relationship with Farwell Group might take a toll. It isn't worth the risk. She then glanced at Jonathan to gauge his reaction. Jonathan stared at her icily and waited for her to devise more excuses to justify her foolish actions. Don't you know what Roxanne did to the Farwell family 6 years ago? She deserves to get punished for her irresponsible actions. Frida tried to add fuel to the fire. Right after she said that, Jonathan let out an icy snort. Frida's heart leaped to her throat as she shot him a perplexed look. You remember what Dr. Jarvis did to the Farwell family 6 years ago, so I believe you still remember how Dr. Jarvis cured Grandpa a while ago. The more Frida spoke, the more ridiculous Jonathan felt. He promptly exposed Frida's lousy excuse. Taken aback, Frida turned to look at Alfred instinctively. Based on what Jonathan said, it was clear that Alfred had made up his mind. Grandpa, Frida's voice softened when she belatedly realized that she should act coy to Alfred. After hearing her excuses, Alfred was puzzled and exhausted. He had treated his grandchildren equally over the years and taught them personally. However, Frida grew up as an ungrateful young lady with extreme behavior. Does she not respect me at all? Disappointment flooded Alfred's heart as he gave Frida a crestfallen look. Don't turn to me. Dr. Jarvis saved my life, and I made that clear during the banquet that we should treat Dr. Jarvis as our family. How could you do that to her? Frida hurriedly explained, Grandpa, you've gotten it wrong. Alfred interjected, will you admit to your mistake? His voice was stern as he stared at her intently. Frida fell silent, but the fear on her face turned to indignance. Indeed, she had her reason for doing that, but she also did it for the sake of Queen Group. How dare they question me now? They will realize they are wrong when Farwell Group causes trouble for them in the future. As she didn't seem to regret her actions, Alfred shook his head in disappointment. If from today onward you aren't allowed to interfere in Queen Group's business anymore. Jonathan will be in charge of Queen Group solely. Frida's head whipped up in shock at her grandfather's words. Before she could protest, Alfred gestured for Jonathan to take him upstairs. He didn't want to stay back and listen to her nonsense. Keep an eye on Frida. She's reckless, so I'm afraid she'll do something foolish, he told Jonathan. Jonathan agreed to his request hastily. Don't worry. Also, don't take Frida's words to heart. We shall supply Dr. Jarvis with the medicinal herbs she needs. I shall bear the responsibility if Farwell Group causes trouble for us. Alfred reminded, Queen Group honors its promise, so we can't break our principle. Jonathan nodded in response. I'll call Dr. Jarvis now to explain the situation to her, he said. Alfred shot him a curt nod. You can leave now. I'm tired. After learning what Frida did, Alfred had gone cold with fury. Exhaustion only caught up to him after he dealt with the matter. After helping Alfred to get into bed, Jonathan left the bedroom. He then gave Roxanne a call. Meanwhile, Roxanne was feeling heavy-hearted in her office. It was getting dark, but Queen Group still hadn't reverted to her. She started suspecting that Colby was right. Queen Group promised to investigate the matter, but it was just an excuse to brush her off. If he's right, I'll have to figure out a way to contact the medicinal herb suppliers in the neighboring city. It will take time to deliver the medicinal herbs, but that's the only way for now. I wonder if those people have received warning from Farwell Group. With that thought in mind, Roxanne pulled her phone out to call the senior she met at a previous academic conference. She had just gotten her phone when it started vibrating and ringing. Stunned, Roxanne furrowed her brows and glanced at her screen. Her eyes lit up when she spotted the caller ID. Mr. Queen, she greeted. Jonathan told her apologetically, Dr. Jarvis, I've investigated the matter and it was just a misunderstanding. I've dealt with it, so we shall deliver the medicinal herbs you need to the Research Institute tomorrow morning." Hearing that, Roxanne exhaled in relief. She could finally relax at the good news. "Can I ask what happened?" Jonathan fell silent for a few moments. "Well, it's an internal problem within Queen Group, so I can't tell you anything. However, it won't happen again." "Don't worry," he assured. Roxanne didn't ask any more questions and nodded. "Thank you." Jonathan chuckled. "You're welcome. If you need any medicinal herbs urgently, please consider Queen Group first. We promise we'll deliver the medicinal herbs as stipulated on the contract." Roxanne thanked him gratefully. After a brief small talk, the two ended the call. At the same time, someone knocked on Roxanne's door. Colby entered her office. He had waited the entire day but didn't receive any updates from Queen Group. Hence, he got worried and came over to ask Roxanne about the matter. "Dr. Jarvis, did Queen Group give you any update about the matter?" he urged. He noticed the smile flitting across Roxanne's lips right after he asked that question. "They just called and promised to deliver the medicinal herbs first thing tomorrow morning," Roxanne told him cheerfully. Colby had already guessed the answer from her expression. He flashed a grin and said, "I knew Queen Group wouldn't go back on their word." His smile slipped as he added, "But Queen Group is the only company that is willing to work with us right now. It isn't enough." The Research Institute was expanding quickly, so Queen Group couldn't supply the medicinal herbs they needed fast enough. Roxanne's smile faded. "No matter what, this batch of medicinal herbs can solve our problem for now." On the other hand, Frida was furious as she assumed her brother and grandfather didn't appreciate her efforts. Consequently, they even forbade her from interfering in Queen Group's business. After Alfred and Jonathan went upstairs, Frida plopped onto the couch angrily and brooded for a long time. She would occasionally vent her frustrations on the servants. As she failed to tamp down her frustration, she called Aubrey. "Hey Aubrey, where are you?" Aubrey was in the hospital and Sonia was sitting beside her. Hearing Frida's voice, she lowered her phone's volume and responded, "I'm in the hospital." "What's wrong? Haven't you got discharged yet?" Frida asked in concern. Frida knew Aubrey was admitted to the hospital after she got hurt trying to save Sonia. Frida often visited Aubrey at the hospital, but she didn't realize Aubrey's condition was that serious. Aubrey glanced at Sonia and said pretentiously, "I wanted to discharge from the hospital as I think I'm doing better, but Mrs. Farwell is worried about me." Hearing that, Sonia shot her a reproachful look. Aubrey flashed a coy smile as their gazes met. "It's only right for Mrs. Farwell to show her concern for you as you got hurt trying to save her. Besides, you're her future daughter-in-law. Who else should she shower her affection on if not for you?" Frida answered cheerfully. Recalling what happened earlier, she put on a gloomy expression. "I'll come visit you later. Wait for me." Aubrey grunted in agreement. After the call ended, Sonia offered her a slice of orange. Taking the slice of orange from her, Aubrey said, "Mrs. Farwell, I've already recovered. You don't have to take care of me. You're making me feel rather uneasy." Sonia shot her a disapproving look. "You are injured, so you need to recuperate in the hospital for some time. Why do you feel uneasy if I were to take care of you? You got hurt because of me. I'll feel bad if I don't take care of you." Aubrey's lips curled as she ate the orange obediently. Sonia was pleased by how obedient Aubrey looked. Nodding, she added, "After you marry into the Farwell family, we will have a lot of time to care for each other." Aubrey's cheeks turned pink as she gave Sonia a shy look. "Mrs. Farwell, Lucian hasn't made up his mind yet." "Stop saying that. Lucian will listen to me. Roxanne is getting kicked out of Horrington." Who else can Lucian marry besides you? Sonia said solemnly. Aubrey promptly feigned ignorance. Why would you say that? I've warned all medicinal herb suppliers in Horrington to stop providing medicinal herbs to Roxanne. If she knows her place, she should know that she isn't welcomed in Horrington. Sonia responded coolly. As Pearson Group was one of the biggest medicinal herb suppliers in Horrington, Aubrey knew that Sonia meant what she said. Despite feeling delighted inwardly, Aubrey protested, Mrs. Farwell, isn't this too much? If the Research Institute discovers that Roxanne is the reason, you don't have to pity her, for she brought this upon herself. How dare she return to Horrington after what she did to us? Sonia patted Aubrey's shoulder to console her. Aubrey pursed her lips and smiled. Who called you? Sonia asked. It was Frida. She will be coming later to pay me a visit later, came Aubrey's answer. Sonia put the stuff she was holding aside and got to her feet. You have a visitor, so I won't disturb you. Not long after Sonia left, someone knocked on the door. Frida then walked in wearing a bitter expression. What's wrong? Did someone bully you? Aubrey questioned as she was confused after seeing her expression. Frida sat beside the bed and started peeling an apple distractedly. My brother and my grandpa, she complained. As Frida wasn't focusing on peeling the apple, Aubrey took the apple and knife away from her. Patiently she asked, what did they do to you? They found out I was the one who told Rex to not supply the medicinal herbs to Roxanne. Frida shot her an aggrieved look. Actually, it was Aubrey who gave her the idea in the first place. If Aubrey hadn't mentioned the matter, Frida wouldn't find out that Sonia had blacklisted Roxanne. As they both disliked Roxanne, Aubrey suggested that she should grab the opportunity to stop supplying medicinal herbs to Roxanne. Besides getting to vent their frustration, they could also improve the relationship between Queen Group and Farwell Group. Frida didn't think much about it. Assuming that Aubrey was helping her, she did as she was told. After she received a scolding, she immediately came to Aubrey and poured out her grievances. A flash of disgust appeared in Aubrey's eyes. I can't believe Frida couldn't accomplish something this simple. Despite thinking that way, Aubrey had to pretend to be a caring and understanding friend. Then what happened? Did they reprimand you? She urged softly. Frida nodded angrily. They said I was trying to destroy the Queen family's reputation. I was prohibited to interfere in Queen Group's business from now on. Having said that, Frida took Aubrey's other arm and gave her a pleading look. Aubrey, you know I did nothing wrong. Please help me explain to Jonathan and my grandpa. I did nothing wrong but lost my voice in Queen Group. It's not worthwhile at all. A flash of impatience appeared on Aubrey's face as she brushed Frida's hand away discreetly. Calm down. It's normal for old Mr. Queen and Jonathan to react that way, for it was Roxanne who cured old Mr. Queen's illness. Jonathan had always stood on Roxanne's side, so it's normal for him to defend her. Frida's expression changed slightly. Are we going to let Roxanne off easily this time? Aubrey grimaced. Did Queen Group resume supplying medicinal herbs to Roxanne's Research Institute? Frida nodded gravely. Obviously, Jonathan and Grandpa want to continue supplying medicinal herbs to Roxanne. A wave of fury crashed through Frida when she thought of she failed to teach Roxanne a lesson and instead ended up getting reprimanded by her family. Aubrey's rage nearly went through the roof, for that meant that Sonia's plan had fallen short. She didn't want Queen Group to intervene and hinted at Frida to take action against Roxanne. Alas, she didn't know that Frida was that unreliable. Aubrey fell silent, but Frida didn't realize anything was wrong and continued to pour her grievances. I wonder why Grandpa and Jonathan sided with Roxanne when all she did was cure Grandpa's illness. They refuse to believe me even though I am one of them. I did this for Queen Group's sake, she complained. Aubrey was getting annoyed, so she merely replied half-heartedly, they will soon know that you're right. Hearing her acknowledgement, Frida was pleased. I knew I was right. However, she couldn't help but lament, ugh, we let her off easily this time. Aubrey's eyes were blocks of ice. Frida was rather confused. Could it be that Aubrey has another trick up her sleeve? With that thought in mind, Frida asked carefully, Aubrey, do you mean that you have another way to teach Roxanne a lesson? Ugh, she's so annoying. Even if I have another trick up my sleeve, why would I let her know? She's no help at all. However, Aubrey knew she would still need Frida's help one day. Thus she assured Frida, don't worry. I won't let that batch gain the upper hand. She was the reason you got chided by old Mr. Queen and Jonathan. I shall avenge you and make sure she gets what she deserves. In just a few words, Aubrey had placed the blame on Roxanne. Frida nodded vehemently. Since I met her, Grandpa and Jonathan kept finding fault with me. I'm one of them, but they insisted on siding with her. We really need to teach her a lesson. Having achieved her goal, Aubrey squinted her eyes in satisfaction. She patted Frida's shoulder and said, don't forget that we're not the only ones who hate Roxanne. Her words stunned Frida. It took a while for the latter to realize what she meant. Oh, I forgot that it was Sonia who came up with the plan to make things difficult for Roxanne. There's no way Roxanne can get what she wants. It was clear that Sonia wanted to take Roxanne down to help Aubrey. After all, everyone saw how Sonia adored Aubrey all the years. There was no way Sonia would allow Roxanne, who suddenly returned, to take the place belonging to Aubrey. Besides, Roxanne left without saying goodbye 6 years ago and only left behind a divorce agreement. It meant that she had dumped Lucian instead of the other way around. Her action brought shame to the Farwell family. Sonia would never forgive Roxanne ever. The more Frida pondered over the matter, the more excited she got. Her anger disappeared into thin air as she grinned and fawned over Aubrey. Mrs. Farwell adores you, Aubrey. This time, she must have taken action against Roxanne because of you. Aubrey was inwardly delighted, but she put on an act and furrowed her brows. That has nothing to do with me. It was that batch who has a death wish. Glancing at Aubrey's wounded arm, Frida responded, Roxanne returned to the country a while ago, but Mrs. Farwell didn't take action against her until you got hurt. Do you still think it has nothing to do with you? She only took action as Roxanne caused your arm to get injured twice. Aubrey turned to look other arm and flashed a smile and said nothing. Indeed, if she hadn't decided to be ruthless toward herself, Sonia might still be tolerating Roxanne's existence. Her injury had forced Sonia to take sides. Frida put on a flattering smile. Mrs. Farwell adores you. Roxanne bullied you, so she must teach Roxanne a lesson. You're her future daughter-in-law after all. Aubrey's lips twitched. We have to wait for Lucian's decision. Frida couldn't care less. Mrs. Farwell is on your side. After she kicked Roxanne out of Horrington, you'll be the only woman by Lucian's side. Who else can he marry besides you? Just wait patiently for the day to come. You'll be his wife in the near future. She's right. Aubrey's heart swelled with an indescribable sense of happiness at that thought. When Roxanne returned home in the evening, Lisa had brought Archie and Benny home and prepared dinner for them. Upon noticing Roxanne from a distance, the two children greeted her, "You must be tired, Mommy." They tilted their heads to look at Roxanne and realized she looked worn out. The two boys exchanged glances. Mommy must have had a hard time at work. Roxanne was exhausted after a long day at work, but after seeing how worried her sons were, she pulled herself together. Stroking their heads, she smiled. Thank you, my darlings. When her words fell, Archie and Benny immediately ran to fetch her a pair of slippers and place them at her feet. Roxanne responded with a grin. When she took off her coat, the two boys grabbed it from her and hung it on the rack. It took them a while as they were not tall enough to reach the coat rack. Roxanne giggled while patiently waiting for the boys. After they managed to hang the coat, she led them to the dining table and sat them down. Bon appétit, mommy. The two little ones even gave their mother some of their food. Roxanne's smile grew wider. All her exhaustion vanished in a flash when she saw how obedient Archie and Benny were. Mommy, you must be tired, right? Benny leaned over to observe her expression. Roxanne responded with a comforting smile, not at all, especially seeing your faces. The two boys looked at her with suspicion. Come, try some. Roxanne gave them a portion of her food as well. Just when she thought the little ones would dine in peace, Benny suddenly questioned endearingly, Mommy, when do we get to travel out of the country again? Archie, sitting on the side, shot a glance at Roxanne. Roxanne froze for a moment before answering, I still have work to do at the Research Institute. We can travel once I complete all my tasks. Does that mean we won't get to travel anytime soon? Benny queried again. Roxanne bobbed her head in response to his question. How long more do we have to wait? Benny refused to give in for some reason, making Roxanne knit her brows. When their gazes met, she noticed his eyes were full of anticipation. Roxanne could not help but feel a pang of guilt. The two boys enjoyed living in Chanaye, yet they had to relocate from one place to another because of her. However, knowing Sonia was on their backs, Roxanne had no choice but to steel herself and grasp at straws. When she did not reply to them even after some time, the little ones urged her to give them an answer, Mommy. Hearing that, Roxanne came back to her senses and put on a cursory smile. I don't have an answer yet. What's with the question, though? Archie and Benny exchanged glances again. They were disappointed with Roxanne's response. Seeing them like this, Roxanne had no idea what was on their minds. We bumped into Essie in the kindergarten. She came to play with us, but we could tell she wasn't happy, Benny said in a sweet, mellow voice. Looking at Roxanne, he pleaded, Mommy, can we stay a little longer? Roxanne felt a tingling pain in her heart when she thought of Estella. After keeping mum for a moment, she shook her head. We have to leave after I've completed my work here. Don't you miss Professor Lambert? Feeling disappointed, Archie and Benny lowered their heads. Roxanne was at a loss for words upon noticing how downhearted they were. Thankfully, Archie and Benny knew their mother could not bear to leave Estella either. Although they were upset, they eventually regained their composure and continued finishing their dinner, sensibly not uttering another word. By the time Roxanne finished her dinner, she had drained every last bit of her energy. The two boys went upstairs to rest as they were not in the mood to play anymore. Watching them sleep, Roxanne gently stroked their cheeks and whispered, Sorry, darlings. At such a young age, Archie and Benny had to travel from one place to another because of her. By right, these boys deserved a better life. Had she told Lucian the truth, the Farwell family would for sure take them back and they would be able to enjoy all the privileges. Yet Roxanne chose to keep them by her side. She had worked hard over the years to make it up to the boys, but it seemed what she did was far from enough. After watching them sleep for a while, Roxanne leaned forward and gave them a peck on their foreheads. She then stood up, turned off the lights, and left the room. When they heard the sound of the closing door, Archie and Benny gradually opened their eyes and exchanged looks. They heard Roxanne's apology because they had been awake all along. Why did Mommy apologize to us? Did she do anything bad to us? Returning to her room, Roxanne packed her things for a while before lying on her bed. As she had a long day at work, she thought she would fall deep into slumber in no time, but the moment she shut her eyes, all sorts of images kept popping up in her mind. She recalled how Sonia confronted her in the cafe, how Estella cried while pleading with her to stay, and the disappointment on Archie's and Benny's faces. Roxanne felt helpless. My life is nothing but a joke. After working hard for so many years, she thought she had garnered enough strength to face the Farwell family, but that was not the case. To the Farwells, she was just another small fry. Once again, she had to leave the city because of the Farwell family. After what seemed like a long time, Roxanne finally fell asleep. When the alarm rang the next day, Roxanne woke up with a headache. However, upon remembering Queen Group would deliver the herb today, she forced herself to crawl out of bed. Even when she was freshening up in the bathroom, she was still very much in a daze. By the time she got downstairs, Archie and Benny were already having their breakfast by the table. When the two boys saw their mother coming down the stairs, they remembered how she had apologized to them last night. Even so, they believed Roxanne apologized to them when they were asleep because she did not want them to know, so they decided not to pursue the matter. Looking at her face, they expressed their concern. "Did you not sleep well, Mommy?" That question took Roxanne by surprise. "You have dark circles under your eyes," Archie added with a serious look as he was worried about her. Upon hearing that, Roxanne immediately understood what they were implying. Plastering a smile on her face, she said, "I couldn't sleep well because I had too much coffee at work yesterday." "Thanks for your concern, darlings." The two boys looked at each other, skeptical about her answer. After asking her a few more questions, they finally settled down. After breakfast, Roxanne requested Lisa's help to send them to the kindergarten. Then she went upstairs to put on simple makeup and drove to the Research Institute. During the drive to the Research Institute, she could help but feel a tad anxious. Jonathan might have given her his promise, but somehow she still felt insecure because she had not seen the herb. Based on her experience with the other business associates, problems always occurred during the delivery. Had she not called them to check on the progress, they did not even bother to tell her the truth. Roxanne arrived at the Research Institute's entrance and saw Colby doing a check on the herb. Standing beside him was a plump man in a suit. She had no idea what their conversation was about but could tell Colby was annoyed by the man who tried to please him. Roxanne rarely saw such an expression on Colby, as he had always been a patient gentleman. Quickening her steps, she walked up to them. "Dr. Galloway, I didn't do this on purpose. I was in a meeting when you called me yesterday and I thought..." Before the man could finish his sentence, Colby interrupted him indifferently when he saw Roxanne coming in his direction. He then introduced Roxanne to the man. "This is Dr. Roxanne Jarvis, the person in charge of our Research Institute. Please tell her what you told me just now." The man froze for a moment and immediately tilted his head to look at Roxanne. He then greeted her with respect. "Dr. Jarvis, I'm Rex Tanner, the manager in charge of the herb from Queen Group. You can call me Rex." Roxanne looked confused. This man is from Queen Group? What's going on? Words caught in Rex's throat as he did not know how to explain the situation to Roxanne. Truthfully, Rex was a victim of the incident. He only gave Colby an attitude because Frida told him that was Jonathan's idea. Now he had no choice but to bear the consequences. When Jonathan ordered him to apologize to people in the Research Institute, he thought he should beg for their forgiveness in person instead of making a call. That was why he came here with his entourage. Never did Rex think they would give him the cold shoulder. He tried buttering Colby up, yet the latter ignored him. "But I can't come clean and tell them the instruction came from Ms. Queen, can I?" When he found out Roxanne was the person in charge of the Research Institute, he even further humbled himself before her, as he knew she was the same person who cured Alfred. After exchanging glances with Colby for a moment, Roxanne looked at Rex and nodded at him in response. "What brings you here, Mr. Tanner?" she queried. Roxanne believed the man standing in front of her was the man who did not bother to entertain Colby over the phone. No wonder Colby gives him attitude today. Upon hearing the tone of Roxanne's voice, he could not help but sigh before saying apologetically, "Dr. Jarvis, Dr. Galloway called me yesterday, but I was in an urgent meeting when I thought of returning his call after the meeting. Mr. Queen called me to his office. I got caught up with work and eventually forgot to get back to Dr. Galloway. And that's how the misunderstanding started." Roxanne's lips curled into a cold smile. "In other words, you're blaming us for being impatient? Are you trying to say we should have waited for your call, Mr. Tanner?" Cold sweat began beading on Rex's forehead. He thought talking to Roxanne would be easier than communicating with Colby because the former was a woman, but to his surprise, she twisted his words and intimidated him. "That's not what I meant." The woman was petite but exuded a domineering aura. Rex broke out in cold sweat as he could not explain himself. Roxanne glared at him for a few seconds before reaching out her hand. Dialing down her domineering aura, she uttered, "Since you're the manager in charge of Queen Group's herb, and we'll still be working closely with you in the future, I hope you'll treat us with respect and ensure that yesterday's incident will not repeat." At the end of the day, the man was from Queen Group. Since Jonathan had left the matter to that man's hand, that meant he was also one of Jonathan's men. Therefore, Roxanne was not going to put him in a tough spot. What she said earlier was merely a reminder for him that the research institute was not easy to deal with and for him to put in more effort into the matter in the future. Coming back to his sense, Rex let out a loud sigh of relief. He then quickly held Roxanne's hand, nodding vigorously. Of course, of course." Roxanne flashed him a polite smile. "I look forward to working with you then." Rex wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and agreed to her words fervently. On the other side, Colby was done with counting the herbs. He then asked the employees to move the boxes in before he walked over to the other two people. Clearly, Rex had done similar jobs before, for he quickly handed Colby the document when he saw the other man approaching them. Colby glanced at Roxanne. Technically, the person in charge should be the one signing it. Nevertheless, Roxanne inclined her head at Colby. After a moment of hesitation, Colby took the document and signed it. However, long after he signed the document, Rex did not take it back. It seemed as if the latter was lost in his thoughts. The corner of Colby's lips twitched before he noncommittally urged, "Mr. Tanner?" Hearing him, Rex snapped back to his senses and awkwardly took back the document. He then poured another round of apologies before Roxanne used her work as an excuse for him to leave. After watching the people from Queen Group leave, the two turned and went back into the research institute. "Will this batch of herbs be enough?" Roxanne asked seriously. Colby was walking behind her when he heard her. He then nodded. "Maybe Queen Group is trying to compensate us for how Rex rejected us yesterday because they've given us a little more herbs than we've ordered. We'll have enough for this period of time. In fact, we might have a little more than enough." Hearing that, Roxanne furrowed her brows. "Why didn't you say anything about that just now?" Colby arched a brow in response. "I wanted to, but I saw that the list stated the same amount as the amount I've calculated, so I didn't raise the issue." If he were to mention it around Rex, Rex would certainly take the opportunity to brush over his rejection the day before. There was no way Colby would give him the chance to do that. Knowing what he was thinking about, Roxanne sighed. Even so, she knew it was Jonathan's doing. She could avoid mentioning it around Rex, but she had to thank Jonathan still. The moment Roxanne returned to her office, she called Jonathan. Jonathan picked up the call quickly. In fact, he even started speaking before Roxanne could. Dr. Jarvis, have you received the herbs from Queen Group? Roxanne chuckled. I have. Your company's people came earlier than I did. Moreover, I saw that Queen Group has sent us more than I ordered. Mr. Queen, this is what you intended, right? Jonathan did not disagree with that. What happened yesterday must have been troublesome for your research institute. After you left, my grandpa chided me. Indeed, we should be held responsible for this, but I didn't know how we could compensate you. So, Dr. Jarvis, I hope you'll accept these herbs. Having Rex send the research institute more herbs than ordered was partially a selfish wish of Jonathan. He hoped it would salvage Queen Group's reputation among Roxanne and the others. Roxanne did not reject Jonathan as she knew that the extra herbs were but a trivial amount to Queen Group. Instead, she said, "Thank you, then. It's true that your batch of herbs has helped resolve my current crisis. I'll come to you to thank you personally another day." That sounds like a good idea. Jonathan chuckled. My grandpa has been asking about when he will be meeting you. After a brief small talk, the two ended the call. Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this story, please like and share so others can see it too. Also hit the subscription button and notification bell so you can be notified on our next release. Thank you for your support. God bless you.